Hi, we're Richard and Jackie from Early Retirement Wanderlust.
We've just got back from our winter ski trip to the Alps, and naturally at this time of year our minds turn to the summer and the adventures ahead. Last summer we toured the French Atlantic coast, and we thought we'd take this opportunity to take you through some of our favourite destinations that you might like to visit on the French Atlantic coast.
So if you're anything like us, it's the end of March and our thoughts have definitely turned to planning our summer trips. And we thought in our next few videos that we would take you through some of our favourite destinations that we've been to in our VW campervan for the last 6 years.
So last year we toured the French Atlantic coast, and we thought we'd take this opportunity to revisit some of our favourite destinations and hopefully give you some ideas of where potentially you could travel down that Atlantic coast.
And within that trip, it almost felt like we had 3 separate holidays in one, didn't it? We started off on the southwest Atlantic coast, where it was just really wild and windy, and the beaches were fantastic for boogie boarding and watching the kite surfers. Then we moved up to the French islands. We visited the Oloron and the Ile de Ré and Noirmoutier, which were just fab. And then we had the historic bit when we were up in Brittany, so we had a bit of everything.
We started last year's road trip by sailing into northern Spain, so our first stop off in southwest France was Biarritz. It's somewhere where we both wanted to visit for quite some time because it is renowned as a very glitzy sort of surf capital of that region, and it didn't disappoint. We stayed at a campsite just outside the town, and then we used our bikes to cycle in, and it was a really strange experience because you've got a whole host of different beaches that are completely surrounded and encapsulated by the town. It's got quite a Victorian feel about it, but it's very glitzy. It's a great place to sit and have a coffee and watch people wander by, and the beaches are quintessentially French town beaches.
I really enjoyed though. We cycled a little bit further north of Biarritz and we hit a beach called Anglet, and that was the iconic surf beach, and it had a boardwalk with all stars with all the famous surfers that had been there over the years. There was just a really nice atmosphere there.
So then from the very glitzy centre of Biarritz we then moved on.
Yeah, we found an air at a place called Capreton. The air is huge. You could park at least 100 motorhomes there. It's basically a beach car park. It was €13 a night. A little man comes round with his machine that takes you €13, so there's no escaping that, which is fab. And a little bread van came round in the morning every day. The one downside to this air was obviously we don't have onboard facilities in the VW, and the toilets were the very traditional self-cleaning public loos that France seems to love, and they were disgusting. But didn't have to use them very often. The beaches there were just amazing. We spent a couple of days there in the end because we loved it that much. We could watch the kite surfers. There were some really amazing surfers because the swell was great while we were there. It was just such a lovely place, and there was just such a lovely chilled out atmosphere. There was sort of music drifting from some of the different vans. They didn't mind you getting tables and chairs out. It was a nice atmosphere.
And it had a great little beachside bar just at the top of the boardwalk over to the beach. So it had that very relaxed summer feeling that everyone likes. We then headed further north to Massages, which is again another bit of a surf mecca. We stayed at a really basic campsite. It was a municipal campsite. It was grey, it was back to basics, but it was based just behind the dunes, again on a fantastic beach, and we just really enjoyed our time there and got the opportunity to get the bikes out.
Yeah, we took the bikes with us, and for the first time we actually used them loads. There was lots of forest cycle paths that we could go on. You could go along the beach fronts. We had a blast.
And one of the most bizarre things that we were a little bit disturbed at to start with, in the town we thought that there was a bullfighting ring, But then when we did a little bit of research behind that, the region is known not for bullfighting, but for bull vaulting. So the whole town comes together in this little mini stadium, and the men take their opportunities to jump over bulls that are running at them. Quite a bizarre sport.
And then our final destination on the southwest coast of France was at Bicaros. We actually liked it that much. We stayed there for 3 or 4 nights. The campsite that we found through the Axi system was actually a bargain. If we hadn't got the card, it would have been about €35 a night, and I think we paid €21. And the facilities were fab. We were right by the beach and in the forests. The surf beach was amazing, and we had quite a few nights there where we just took our lovely little flask of pink wine and sat and watched the sunsets. One place that we visited but we didn't actually stay was the Dunes de Pilat, which is Europe's highest sand dune. We would really recommend you going to visit it. It was quite an experience climbing it. One of the reasons we didn't stay is most of the campsites were still closed. They'd had a huge forest fire a couple of years ago, but I think they were pretty much ready to open this year. So yeah, I would definitely stay if we had the chance.
Moving on to the next section is the Vendee and the Atlantic Islands. To be honest, we passed through the Vendee pretty quick because we'd spent quite a bit of time there in the past, and if we were really honest, we were really impatient to get to the Atlantic Islands because we knew what a treat that we were going to have in store.
So the first island that we visited was the Ile d'Oléron that we've never been to before. And actually, I really enjoyed it. It was so much quieter than when we've been to the Ile de Ré. It was an absolutely stunning island. We stayed on a Camping Utopia site that was based right by the beach. We had some amazing sunsets that we could go and watch. And the cycling on the island was fab. We did a 40-kilometre cycle and probably only got about 20 metres ascent on all of that cycle, right up to the lighthouse, which was beautiful. And we did come past some really great surfing beaches. We sat for about 3 hours and sunbathed. It was just a really nice slow pace of life and a quieter island.
And the use of bikes is a common theme across all of the Atlantic Islands. So when you've seen bike paths before, you've not seen bike paths like this. So you can literally park your camper van up and you can rely on bikes to get around the rest of the island. These are designated cycleways. They are 90% of the time away from main roads or definitely separated from the main roads, and there is just no need to move your van.
We then moved further north to the Ile de Ré that we've been to quite a few times before.
The Ile de Ré is probably one of the destinations to go to in France, and it is really, really popular, and you do need to bear that in mind because whether you're going in high season or low season, it can be quite difficult to find places to stay, and we would absolutely recommend that you book in advance. We were lucky enough to get onto another Utopia site, and we stayed there for around about a week because it's such a happy place.
And the campsite was actually in the middle of the island, which doesn't sound ideal to some people who would maybe prefer to be by the beach, but it was just so well located. We could cycle into the 2 villages of St Martin de Ré and Flotte, which are stunning, and we would go and have a bottle of rosé and just watch the harbour life and watch people. Quite interesting. And yeah, there was just so much to do from that campsite.
The villages of the Ile de Ré have to be an absolute highlight, and as you're cycling around the island, you will just not believe the beautiful places that you stumble upon, whether it be, as Jackie says, some of the major tourist destinations, or whether it's just the tiny little hamlets that are around the island. If you've got a motorhome or camper van with its own facilities, there is a free air that's really well located in the island. I do think at peak times you struggle to get on there because obviously the island is a very popular destination, but it's worth a thought.
Yeah, and if you are visiting the Ile de Ré, I would definitely, of all the places that we've mentioned, book your campsites earlier rather than later, low season or high season. It was really busy.
And then we headed further north to Noirmoutier. Now, we'd not really heard of that before, and we definitely think it's something that's been kept a little bit secret. It's a French enclave and the French love it, and there weren't many British people there.
We really enjoyed our time on Noirmoutier. One of the things that stood out for me was the blockhouses. I saw them on Google Maps and I was like, what is a blockhouse? And actually all along the beach where our campsite was based were these old World War II ruins. But what we really liked about the blockhouses is that the local graffiti artists have transformed them with some stunning artwork. We spent a fab afternoon just exploring them, climbing on top of them, having having a picnic around there. It is a really nice island.
Now, we didn't stay at a Utopia site. We were going to stay at a serviced air on the island, but then we realised for a couple of euros more, we could stay at the municipal campsite that was right next to the air and have the facilities of the swimming pool and the shower and toilet blocks. And we had a great time there. It was a very French and very basic campsite, but just exactly what we wanted. And it was just a small walk over the dunes down onto the beach.
And we were, I think, the only English people on a very busy campsite. We did cycle up to the local town that was about 7 miles further into the island, and there was a lovely Camping Utopia site there that perhaps if we were to visit the island again, we would stay at because you would have access to the town.
One of the really interesting things about Noirmoutier is that its main industry, seemingly, is salt farming. So whenever you cycled around the island, you could see these flooded sort of ponds that they used to evaporate the water from, and you could get some very renowned Noirmoutier salt from there.
To get to Noirmoutier, you have to go over a big bridge. But interestingly, and one of the reasons I want to return, is there's also a causeway that floods at high tide, and you can cycle on and off the island through that, and I'd love to have a go at that. So moving on from island life, the next place that we visited was Brittany, and we did a bit of a historic tour there. We started off in the ancient town of Vannes, which was just stunning. We explored the ramparts.
We then moved on to Concarneau, which is a bustling and yet historic seaside town. It's a centre for sailing. It's got a medieval fortified castle, seemingly in the middle of the harbour, and it is just a beautiful place to stop off and sample some real Brittany life.
And we were on a bit of a quick bus stop tour really, because we didn't have long left in Brittany. So the last historic town that we visited was Quimper, which we were there on a Sunday morning. It was actually quite nice. We just had a lazy coffee, watching life go by just outside the cathedral, which is absolutely stunning, before we moved on to a really nice beach town of Cameret.
We actually stayed at a service air there, and for us it was a bit of a new experience, but it worked out really well. It was close to the town centre. We had a bit of a pootle down to the town centre, which had what could only be described as a boat graveyard, with these incredible wrecks of boats that we spent seemingly hours photographing and just exploring. The highlight for us from our Brittany part of the tour was when we were actually heading back towards the ferry, and we stopped off in Dinan.
Dinan for me might have actually been the highlight of our whole trip. It was the most stunning town. We started off finding a free motorhome air that we could stay on, which was basically a field that they'd opened up underneath the huge arches of the road network. Then as you walk up to the historic town, it's got lots of cobbled streets, lots of cafes around there, and the timber-framed houses were just beautiful.
We had a bit of a tip-off from some of the research that we'd done that the town is absolutely rammed during the course of the day, and it was really hustly-bustly, but then the guidebook said if you wait till after 6 o'clock, the town literally just empties out, and we had a lovely night wandering around, just capturing everything on film, and it was just a beautiful place to stop.
And there's also a harbour that you can walk along. And the night we were there, it was really calm and still. And the photography of the lights of the town reflecting on the river was just stunning.
So if you are sailing out of Saint-Malo or Caen, then Dinan is a really good stop-off point for campervanners and motorhomers, and we'd absolutely recommend it. And in the future, if we are travelling out of those ports, we'll definitely use it as a stop-off.
So after our 4 weeks of travelling up the French Atlantic coast, we have got a few top tips for you. The main one being, we thought that we would be able to do a lot more wild camping or find a lot more park-ups that were free for the night, and that really wasn't the case if we wanted to stay right by the coast. We found a few airs that were cheaper, but the wild camping is very, very limited.
We travelled in June, which is still technically classed as low season, so we took advantage of the Axi card, which, for those of you that don't know, it is a discount scheme where you can get discounted pictures on a whole host of campsites, and it served us really well, because in reality we weren't probably paying much more than you would pay for an Air, and yet we'd got all the advantages of electric hookup and all the facilities that we would need.
We also found, as we got closer to July, that the campsites were getting really busy, and we did turn up at a couple of campsites and we couldn't get on because they were full. So I would say that particularly if you're travelling in the school's summer holidays, you absolutely do need to book and pre-plan your journey. And actually, as you got closer to the 7th of July when the French schools broke up, I think on hindsight we would have perhaps booked some of our campsites.
In terms of getting there, there are so many different ferry options and so many different ferry prices. So you could choose to take the cheapest Dover to Calais crossing, but that then would leave you with quite a long drive across France. Or conversely, you could sail like we did into northern Spain, which was considerably more expensive, but it did save on the driving, and to be fair, we were exploring northern Spain at the same time. Somewhere in between, you've got the options of Cherbourg, Caen and St Malo.
Something that we have found on our travels is to make sure that you stay in a place for more than one night. If you only stay for one night, you don't actually get any time on either of those days to explore your surroundings. So we do try and stay at least 2 or 3 nights in any of the places that we visit.
In terms of guidebooks, we use the Martin Dorry Take the Slow Road to France. We like all of Martin Dorry's books because we think the road trips that he recommends in all of his books, whether it be France or the UK, are really, really good. There were so many hidden gems, and we pretty much stuck to his itinerary within these books, and we'd thoroughly recommend them. It's not a sponsored link, but we just love his writing.
So hopefully if you like beach and coast life, we've given you lots of ideas of places that you could visit if you were going along the French Atlantic coast, including the islands.
But if you like your mountains, in our next video, we are going to do a similar format, but we are going to take you to some of our favourite European Alps destinations for summer travels. So that's about it from us.
Yep.
See you later.
Bye.